After I changed the locks on my ex, my new smart home system showed me he wasn't the one I needed to worry about. After Paul and I separated, I kept the house, a modest 4-bedroom, mortgage paid off. 3 months on and half his furniture was still piled in the living room, waiting for him to collect. "How many times do I have to tell you?" he'd yelled over a phone call. "I'll be back, you can count on that. And God help me if there's so much as a scratch." I changed the locks the next morning. There was a lot I didn't know about Paul. This was the first time I truly lived alone. No Paul, no flatmate. Just me and 3 empty bedrooms. Even in a gated neighborhood, break-ins happened. I'd chewed my nails down to stubs over it. I researched smart home technology. If I was doing this, I was going all the way. Smart bulbs, door sensors, automated security. I found a service that met all my needs and ordered with express delivery. It was all tied to one app that logged everything. Every light switched on, every door opened, logged. There was a shortage of security cameras. The packages would arrive within 4 to 6 weeks, they said. That was 2 months ago. I'd have emailed the courier for an update, but I forgot all about it once I started skimming the logs. I'd been having a problem. Lights would switch on in random rooms. The manual warned it might, but this was consistent, daily. I'd be eating a salad in the living room, and the gap under the laundry door would light up. The laundry leads to a back door. A rat, possibly. Something had gotten in and was triggering the sensors. Then it started happening more often. The laundry, the garage, even the living room while I was cooking in the kitchen. But that was only the start of the nightmare. I opened the app to check the logs. Bedroom door opened 2:14 a.m. I stared at it for a long time. My bedroom has an ensuite. I don't leave the room at night. Bedroom door closed 5:58 a.m., just before my alarm goes off. False positives. That's all they are, same as the lights. I locked the bedroom door and called my lawyer, Greg Duggins. "Are you sure he's still in San Francisco?" I asked. "Yes, positive," said Duggins. "He'll be in the States for another week." "Okay," I said, "if you say so." I set the phone down on the bedside table and looked at the door. San Francisco. Right. I turned the handle once to make sure it was locked. I returned to the app and scrolled further down the logs. Laundry door, open, 11 p.m. Laundry light, 11:01 p.m. Entryway light, 11:03 p.m. Hallway light, 11:03 p.m. Second floor hallway light, 11:04 p.m. From then until my bedroom door opened at 2:14 a.m., nothing. I called the cops to report a break-in. While I waited, I kept looking at the timeline. What were they doing on the landing all that time? None of the rooms had their lights triggered. The only place to hide was the linen closet. But there was no space for anything other than a small critter. A rat, like I'd thought. I chewed my lip and opened the bedroom door. The linen closet was within arm's reach. I reached for the handle. Knock, knock, knock. Jesus. I let go of the handle and rushed downstairs to let the police in. "Afternoon, ma'am. We're responding to a call for a break-in." "Yes, come in." I showed them the locks. They agreed it was strange. "Just me. New locks," I said. "Well, there's no sign of forced entry, but there are a few scratch marks around the keyhole. If you've got a new lock, it's not uncommon to scratch the keyhole while your muscle memory adjusts. But it's possible someone broke in, right?" "Well, the door was locked from the inside when we got here, so I doubt it," he said, chewing at his overgrown mustache. "Show us the rooms, and we'll have a look over. Ease your mind." I showed them all the rooms on the first floor, and the bedrooms on the second floor. There wasn't much for them to do. They noted the break-in and advised me to follow up on getting those cameras installed. The police were gone, leaving me completely vulnerable. I dusted Paul's junk and made dinner. I didn't eat much, just poked at my food, scrolling through my contacts. I had 4 friends who would pack an overnight bag and be here within an hour, but I haven't spoken with any of them since the divorce. They'd bring up Paul, and all I wanted was to forget about him and all his crap he kept promising to pick up. I locked up and went to bed. After an hour of flipping my pillow to the cool side, I gave up and checked the logs. No new alerts. Part of me wished I'd never installed the app. I'd be sound asleep by now. To calm myself down, I opened Google and started browsing apartments in my area. Units, suites, something with a lobby and a night guard. Light flashed under my bedroom door. A notification blipped on my phone. Second floor hallway light, 10:58 p.m. I gripped the bedsheets. "Hello?" The light switched off. For a second, I thought I'd seen two shadows, spaced about a shoe length apart. I refreshed the page. No new logs, no other lights triggered. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. I used the app to turn on the hallway lights and looked under the gap. The shadows were gone. No one is there, I told myself. If someone were there, they'd be in the hallway. I'd see their feet, or they'd have gone to another room, which would have triggered the light. The only other area on the second floor was the linen closet, an arm's reach from my door. Did I ever check it? I gripped the bedroom door handle. Open, reach, grab, open. I cracked open the bedroom door. Bzzzt. Freaking. I slammed it shut. Bedroom door, opened, 11:05 p.m. Idiot. I opened the bedroom door and peered through the crack. Floorboards, wall, no shadows. I opened it further, looking at the linen closet. Grab, open. That's all. Then I can go to bed. I gripped the handle. I've got a gun and I'll shoot. I lied. No answer. I'd been hoping there would be one. Then I wouldn't have to open the door. All right. It's your funeral. I ripped open the closet door. Sheets, blankets, a vacuum cleaner, a gap next to the vacuum that hadn't been there before. I looked closer. Something wet pooled in the corner. I sniffed the air. Light beamed up the staircase. Hallway light. 11:07 p.m. A shadow moved down it. Quick steps echoed off the walls. Entryway light. 11:07 p.m. Laundry light. 11:08 p.m. Laundry door. Open. 11:08 p.m. My heart was in my throat. I moved toward the noise, as if I'd convinced myself I really did have a gun. I stopped at the landing. Hey, I saw you. I went down. All the lights were still on. Paul's furniture cast long shadows across the living room. The shade on his lamp turned slowly. Both laundry doors were open. I could see through to the side yard. They'd left. And then, the most terrifying realization of all finally hit me. I stood in the laundry doorway and looked out at the side yard. My phone burned in my hand. I'd been squeezing it. No way of knowing who was in my home. I moved to close the door. The smell hit me again, stronger. I looked back toward the stairs, to the linen closet, right outside my bedroom. I hadn't checked it earlier. I had my hand on the handle. I thought about the hours where nothing had triggered, the time I spent lying in bed, the time they spent crouched in the linen closet, right outside my door, listening, waiting for me to go to sleep. Up next. The first time I cleaned his room, the smell hit me before I even opened the door. Back then, I still lived with my mom and was eager to get out. When I dialed the number provided, a man on the other line picked up in a low, stern voice. He barely asked me any questions, mostly when I could start. When I said I could start immediately, his voice jumped a little, and he said I got the job. To get there, you had to take an exit off the highway and get on an old forest road that had last been paved 3 decades earlier. I was sure it was a scam, but when I got to the address, the motel was there. It was a small 1-floor concrete building painted dark gray with small windows. There was a small parking lot for about 4 cars, but there was no sign outside that said it was a motel. Nearby was a natural reserve, so I figured people already knew of this place and used it as a starting point. No one would stumble onto it by accident. Outside the motel stood the owner, a large older man in his 50s with balding brown hair, wearing a gray buttoned-up shirt and black pants. He greeted me in the same low, stern voice and showed me around, but I soon realized this wasn't a normal place to work. There wasn't much to do. My job would be to clean the rooms and the motel, take calls, check guests in and out, and handle payments. The last place he showed me was my room. It had the same musty blinds and a stained carpet as the other rooms, but at least the sheets looked newer than in the others. Will I be the only one working here? Yes, but don't worry, the season hasn't started. There will be barely any guests. I'll get you a helping hand once the season kicks off. For now, you can manage it yourself. More than the help, I was worried about getting bored. You got everything? I think so. Great. You know where my number is. If you need anything, call me. I live an hour away and can be here in no time. We really value personal privacy here, so make sure to keep that in your head. I didn't realize I was making a face until he furrowed his brows and looked me in the eyes. I really do mean it, okay? Respect their privacy. Yeah, I will. Good, he smiled and shook my hand. His steps echoed down the hall, and soon his car left the parking lot. Over the next few days, I mostly sat around at the reception desk and watched TV. The bell on the door didn't ring once. One Friday evening, I was flipping through the channels when the doorbell rang. I almost fell out of my chair, and my hands frantically searched the table for the guest book. The person came closer to the desk while I was still fumbling with the pages. He was about 30, with a pale face and dark eyes, dressed in a long brown coat, hat, and gloves. The weather outside was cold. The sun had gone down an hour ago, but it still seemed like he was overdressed. "One room, please." "That will be $40. Please sign in." He scribbled his name and signature into the book. I turned around and took a key off the hanger. "If possible, may I get room number 7? I stopped for a second with the key in my hand. Room 7 was the one at the end of the hall. Sure. Thank you." He took the key from me and walked away. Only then did I notice the very large suitcase he carried. This guest was about to change everything for me. After he left, I took the guest book and looked inside, but his writing was so bad, I could barely make out anything. The next morning, I woke up early at sunrise. I got ready and walked to the reception. To my surprise, the key from room 7 was already lying on the table. The guest even signed the checkout time into the guest book. It seemed a little rude, but it also meant less work for me. I got the cleaning supplies and went into the room. The smell hit me before I entered. It was like someone had emptied an entire bottle of air freshener inside. I started coughing and put my shirt over my nose. Save for the smell, the room was strangely clean. Even when I rolled up the blinds, I still couldn't find a spot. The sheets were untouched, and the bathroom seemed that way too. Over the next few days, I spent my time watching TV again. The leaves started falling, so I had at least something extra to do. No one besides that man had stayed. It was true that the hiking season wasn't in full swing, but the emptiness of this place was still weird. It didn't help my mind either. I caught myself talking aloud a few times since I started. It was Friday evening when the bell rang again. When I saw the brown coat, I didn't believe my eyes. It made me almost fall out of the chair again. "Good evening." "Evening." "Back again?" I said, smiling. The man looked from under his hat, his eyes staring into mine. I swallowed and turned around. "Room number 7? "Yes," he said in a low voice. When I turned around, he was already writing his name in the guest book. He had a large suitcase with him again. Just like before, his car was gone, and the key was left at the reception desk. I took the cleaning supplies and made my way to the room. The smell was as strong as before, and the room was spotless again. Sheets not moved, bathroom clean. At least I thought, until I pulled up the blinds. There were a few drops of some liquid on the carpet. I dipped my sponge into the bucket of warm water and started scrubbing, but the stains didn't come off. They seeped into the carpet. "Jesus, what is this?" I said to myself. No matter how hard I tried, it seemed I only managed to spread them more. Looking over the dirty carpet, it probably didn't matter. I wiped the sweat off my face, changed the sheets, and walked back to the reception. The days passed like before. TV, leaves, boredom. When the phone rang on Wednesday, I jumped up out of my seat in excitement. "Hello?" came the owner's low, stern voice. "Hi. Good evening. How have the past 2 weeks been? Is the work too much?" "No. We only had one guest over the past 2 weeks." "Oh yes, I expected that. The season's over, so fewer people." "He's actually been here twice. The same man. Has he been here before by any chance?" "Tall brown coat, hat and gloves." The owner went silent for a few seconds. "What have we said about respecting privacy?" Yes, I know. I didn't ask him anything. I was just wondering." The owner paused again. "Good guest. We don't get many like him this time of the year. Don't bother him. He doesn't like it when people are nosy." "Yes, of course." "Good. If you need anything else, call me," he said and hung up. I stood there for a few minutes, phone still in hand, staring at the key with the number 7 on it. Nothing could have prepared me for what I saw next. By Friday evening, I already had the key ready on the table. I didn't even shut off the TV when the man came. He greeted me with his usual cold demeanor, and I handed him the key and turned the book over. He signed in, left the money on the table, and walked to his room. That night there was a movie on that I couldn't take my eyes off of. I had long ago closed the reception door, but stayed in there, glued to the TV. It was about 1 a.m. when I heard it. At first, I thought it was coming from the TV. I tried to turn the volume down, but the noise didn't quiet down. It only grew louder. Turning the sound off completely, I sat in my chair, looking around, listening. It sounded like someone was digging their fingers in wet dirt, followed by an irregular, almost rubbery crackle. I got up and walked closer to the rooms. The sound was coming from down the hall, from where room number 7 was. I swallowed, walked back to the reception, turned the TV sound back on, and made my way to the room. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being watched. With each step, the sound grew louder, the crackle grew faster, and the digging turned into a tearing-like sound. I was almost at the door when one of the floorboards creaked. The noises stopped immediately. I stopped, frozen to the floor with my eyes locked on the door. I heard the man walking back and forth around the room. Each second, I thought the door would fly open, but only the noises of his steps came. Then it stopped, and the slow crackling and digging started again. I let out a deep sigh and quietly walked back to the reception, turning the TV off and going back into my room. I thought about calling the owner, but I'd have to admit what I did. The last thing I wanted was to go back to living with my mom and lose my income. The morning after, the key was on the table as always, with the checkout time written in the book. This time, the smell of air freshener reached all the way to the reception. I pulled my cleaning supplies out and went into the room. The stains were all over the carpet. No matter how hard I scrubbed, they wouldn't come off. Over the next few days, each time I put the TV on, my mind would drift back to that night. The sounds would echo in my head like I was at the door again. That Friday, he came back at the same time. His voice was monotone as before, but his face was slimmer, gaunter. I had to grip the desk not to ask him questions about what was going on in his room, but as quickly as he came in, he disappeared into the hall. Not even an hour after his arrival, the noises came back again. The digging, the crackling, louder than before. Even at full volume, the TV wasn't louder than the noise. I sat at the desk, fiddling around with pens on the table, looking into the hall. The air began to fill with a strange, musty smell. "What the freaking?" I whispered to myself. I got out of the chair and walked slowly towards the hall. The smell grew stronger with each step. My mouth dropped when I peeked around the corner and saw that the door was open. Not much, just a little, but enough to see into the room if I got closer. I looked around the hall, even though there was no one else there except us, and walked towards the room, walking as nimbly as possible, looking at the floor before putting my foot down. There was a strange, faint feeling of warmth coming from the room, growing as I got closer. The door loomed in front of me. The words of the owner echoed in my mind, but the hole was there, just there, waiting for me to look inside. Taking a step closer, I peered in. A movement on the floor, a shadow. Something inside the suitcase I still don't have a name for. Before I realized it, a gasp escaped my mouth. The man immediately turned around and looked at me. He screeched, smiled, and began crawling towards the door. I backed away, staring into his eyes, not able to look away. He grabbed the doorframe and pulled himself upright in one motion. I turned and ran down the hall. His steps were behind me, but not quick or rushed, slow, as if he knew he didn't have to hurry. I turned the corner, pushed the glass door open, and ran out. The car keys were deep in my pocket. I fumbled to pull them out, but my hand was trembling so badly that I dropped them right behind the car seat. I threw myself behind the seat, pulled out the keys, and started the car. I put the pedal to the floor and bolted from the parking lot. In the mirror, I saw him reach the spot where the car had been and stop, standing still, watching me go. The drive was a blur. I didn't stop until I saw the first open gas station and pulled in. I stumbled inside and sat down at a small table. "You okay?" the attendant said, coming around the corner. I tried to speak, but only gibberish came out. He didn't push it, and a minute later came out with a coffee and a hot dog. I wrapped both hands around the cup and stared out the window at the tree line. He sat opposite and opened his mouth ready to speak, but the phone rang. "Sorry, are you Mr. Blank? A motel owner is asking for you." Up next. The woman I spent the night with just sent me a selfie of herself in the crowd at my high school graduation. At least, that's what I'm inclined to believe. Lately, it's been kind of a struggle. I remember the day we met. Not to sound corny or cliche, but honestly, it felt like love at first sight. Like the moment was meant to be. It was at a little get-together my family had put on for my 21st birthday. I didn't question why she was there. All I could focus on was, well, her face. She was beautiful. And to think that she wanted me of all people. It was darn near intoxicating. We danced the night away to a live cover band of the Beatles, and the entire night felt like a fantasy come to life. Nobody seemed to recognize her, though. All night, it was just me and her, staring into each other's eyes underneath the clear night sky. No interruptions whatsoever. When the party began to wind down and people started to go home, we both agreed that she should stay the night with me. Together, we jetted back to my apartment while I tried to focus on the road and not the sweet nothings she whispered into my ear. When we arrived, it wasn't some kind of straight to the bedroom situation. We actually cuddled on my couch for hours, watching Supernatural and laughing at the cliches before dozing off in each other's arms. Unfortunately, the next morning I had work, so when I woke up, I was fully prepared to ask her to let herself out and assure her that we would see each other again. However, the first thing I noticed as soon as my eyes opened was the fact that I was alone on the sofa. The second thing was the smell of breakfast that permeated my nostrils and made my mouth water. I found her in my kitchen, hair messy and wearing my t-shirt as she scrambled eggs. "Good morning, cutie," she smirked. "I hope you don't mind. I figured I'd make you some breakfast. Consider it a thank you for letting me crash here last night." I groggily stared down at the serving of eggs and bacon. She was really making this hard. To my pleasure, though, once she handed me the plate and planted a kiss on my cheek, she was pretty much already out the door. "Sorry, I don't want to be rude. I just have work," she announced hurriedly. "I'll see you tonight." Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me to quickly wash the dishes and rush out the door. Though we hadn't exchanged numbers yet, which, dumb, I know, at around lunchtime my phone began to blow up with texts. "How's your day going, honey? Working hard? What's for dinner tonight?" At this point, I was starting to get a little freaked out. Not knowing what to do, I blocked the number. So much for love at first sight. I was clearly wrong. However, when new texts started to appear from a new number, I knew that something was definitely wrong. "Haha, did you block me? You silly goose. We're gonna be together forever. You can't get rid of me that easily." At this point, my heart was pounding. I responded firmly, but politely. "Look, I had a really good time with you last night. I just don't think this is gonna work out. I wish you the best, and I hope you find the person for you." The texting bubbles popped up and stayed on the screen for a few minutes. Finally, a response came through. "We can discuss this when you get home." Unfortunately, before I could reply to that insane remark, my boss walked by, and I had to put my phone away. The day went on, and by quitting time, I had received hundreds of texts from this newfound lover. "I chose you. We're gonna be together forever. Don't you remember? I've always been here for you." Obviously psychotic, right? But what pushed it straight into horror movie territory wasn't the words. It was the images, the selfies, a photo of her in the back row at my high school graduation, a picture of me at the DMV as I was receiving my license, my 10th birthday. However, the image that will haunt me the most for the rest of my life was the selfie of her smiling underneath a face mask in the delivery room on the day of my birth. Her appearance hadn't changed once. She hadn't aged a day in 21 years. And as I stared in utter terror at what she had sent me, a new message appeared beneath the photos. We were meant to be. Someone was breaking into my apartment. But they weren't stealing anything. They were cleaning it. I was a 30-something-year-old failure of a man who was hardly holding himself together a couple of years before I am writing this. I lived in a mess. The crap little apartment with a bedroom, what you could call a living room, and a bathroom the size of an airplane one I inhabited didn't have a clear floor in years. I barely worked enough to live, I would regularly spend my free time drunk, and I hadn't eaten a vegetable in about 3 years, which made the next part especially weird. One morning I woke up and took my weekly crap and saw something strange in my toilet. Corn. I thought it was strange because, as previously listed, I hadn't eaten a vegetable in years, let alone corn. I chalked it up as something I did while drunk. Maybe I just craved corn for some reason and decided to get some instead of going after my typical junk food. I moved on from that event, but I kept having corn in my stool. The next week, there was corn in my stool. Then a few days later, corn again. It eventually got to a point where every couple of days I was having corn in my stool, and I was completely lost as to where it was coming from. But the mystery was only just beginning. After 2 months of constant corn, I eventually noticed something even stranger. I could see the floor of my room for the first time since I had moved in years ago. I must have started cleaning my room when I was drunk. There was still trash everywhere, but far less than there used to be. I guess I didn't question any of it because it wasn't a bad thing. I actually liked not having to trudge my way through heaps of fast food wrappers and boxes of old junk food, and I wasn't going to complain if drunk me wanted to renovate a little bit. But after that, it got weirder. I would wake up after I went to sleep and my head wouldn't be burning from a hangover. I would notice myself having more bowel movements than I used to. My clothes were cleaned and folded despite the fact that would have taken hours for drunk me to do. My room was mopped for God's sake, and yet I still didn't question it at that point despite the fact I didn't own a mop, let alone have any intentions of borrowing one. Despite all of that, I still didn't question it until I came home one day and saw that my bed was made. I couldn't have done it because I never made my bed. Drunk me couldn't have done it because he wasn't there, which only meant that somebody else was doing it. My first thought wasn't that somebody was breaking in, but rather that maybe my landlord was doing it, or maybe a concerned neighbor. But then I remembered somebody. I had an old friend from high school message me online about a month before all of this happened. He wanted to say hi to me and catch up. But he was probably the best man I ever knew, and I would feel bad leaving him on red. I had no idea how much I'd soon regret that. He was one of the few people who ever spoke to me and tried to befriend me. I kept to myself mostly, but he'd still try to talk to me, despite my lack of interest in conversation. I told him that if he wanted to hang out, he could come over in front of my apartment and we could talk for a bit, but he actually took it a step further and came inside and talked to my landlord, who happened to be there at the time. Of course, he told him where my apartment was because he had no sense of people's safety and the thought that this person might be coming in to murder me or something. So, needless to say, my old high school friend knocked on my front door and saw my horrid apartment. "Oh," he said to me, taken aback from the sight and smell of my living conditions. How have you been, man?" he managed to stammer through after coming to terms with his shock. I am fine," I replied in embarrassment and shame. "Do you want to go outside?" We ended up not going back into my apartment. Instead, we went to the front of the complex and talked for a while. He asked me what I'd been up to, which I replied with a simple, "Not much." He seemed to accept that answer without prying much further. I asked him how he had been, and his life had been great, talking about how he had just gotten married, his job, his house, his lifestyle that was far better than mine. I don't want to say I was seething with jealousy, but I was definitely made more aware about how terrible my life was compared to his and probably everyone else's. I always knew that my life was awful and that I needed to change, but I just never found the motivation to start. Once the garbage piled, I just let it continue to pile because it had been too difficult to clean up. He eventually told me straight up, "Dude, you live in a mess." I was taken aback by the blatant statement, but he continued, "You can't keep living like that, it's going to kill you." I don't remember what I said, but I think I made a remark about how it's easier said than done, and some other stuff. But despite the fact I was probably a jerk about it, he simply offered me some help. "Look, man, if you ever need it, I can help you clean up your apartment, and maybe the rest of your life. Just call me and I'll be happy to help." I was shocked at this point. "I have to go now, but if you need help, please don't hesitate to ask." I never did call him back, but since that has been happening, I figured maybe I should. Before I called him, I had to even practice what to say. I realized how ridiculous it sounded to ask a friend if he was breaking into my apartment every day to slowly clean up my crap hole of an apartment while I was either drunk, sleeping, or at work. But I figured my landlord would be the type of guy to give him a spare key or something to help him get in, and he also knew I didn't have anything worth robbing. I finally called him and just asked him if he'd like to come by my apartment someday, to which he said he'd come by, but that it would be in a couple of months. But the truth was about to get much darker. I decided to set up some cameras in my house to see if I could catch anyone breaking in when I went to bed. I realized how ridiculous the idea that it could be my friend doing it was, and decided to see if maybe there was a squatter in my apartment or something who was taking care of me for some reason. When I checked the cameras the next day, I was terrified. This long, spindly creature came out of a shadow in the corner. It moved around the ceilings like a spider, and walked across the floor sideways like a crab. It looked emaciated, with what looked like a 5-foot-tall torso, with ribs poking out at the very top. They looked like they could rip through at any second. It had a narrow head that was a dome, with dents where the eyes should be, but simply with smooth skin over them. It reminded me of that squid at the bottom of the ocean with 20-foot-long arms, the way they both weren't meant to be seen by the human eye, but were both discovered in darkness. The disproportionately long arms, of which I'm sure there were at least 8, but more seemed to appear and disappear at random, started scooping up trash, taking it outside, and then coming back in. It did that for a couple of hours before coming back inside with a container of something and a large glass of what I assumed was water, making its way to where I was drunkenly sleeping. It slowly reached an arm out to me, which bent at strange angles I barely understood how it could possibly do without snapping, and pulled the covers over my body, leaving only my head exposed. It proceeded to pour the water down my throat and fed me several different types of food from the container, including strawberries, spinach, cucumber, and of course corn, before it went back to a corner in my room, where it disappeared. Now I know what you're thinking now. I should have packed my bags then and there and never looked back. I know logically that was the correct choice, but I want you to look at it from my point of view. I was living a life that was the pinnacle of misery. I went to bed in a small apartment with nobody who cared for me, surrounded by filth, to a completely clean apartment and a decent diet. At this point, I had started taking care of myself too. I was bathing more regularly, not drinking as much, and even started cleaning up messes myself too. This was a good thing, was truly improving my life even if I didn't completely understand it. The creature even managed to get me a job interview for a place that paid way more. I have no idea how it sent the email, but it was further proof to me that it wanted to improve my life. My life was on the up and up. I got the job the creature landed me an interview for. I was more social. I was happier and healthier. I even started talking to a girl. If you were truly where I was at during this time period, you would have been happy about all of this too, despite the obvious strangeness of it all. It had become such a state for normalcy for me that at some point I sort of forgot about its existence. I stopped checking the cameras after a while because I knew what I would have seen. And honestly, I didn't care how my life was being improved. I was just happy to not be miserable for a change. At this point, I had completely forgotten about my friend coming over. When I heard a knock at my door, I was taken completely off guard by the sight of my old friend, who had a cleaning caddy with multiple sponges, 4 different types of cleaning spray for different surfaces, 2 cleaning brushes, 2 cans of Febreze, and a few other items. He was in shock at the sight of my apartment, which was completely spotless at this point, and almost dropped the caddy full of supplies before catching himself. We ended up talking for hours. Among the many things we talked about, I told him about my new job, the girl I had been seeing, and my complete turnaround. In turn, he told me about his wife and what he did for work. He told me he moved around a lot for work and happened to be staying in the city where I lived last time I saw him, and happened to see me online and figured he'd pop in to see how I was doing at the time. He explained to me that when he saw my living conditions, he knew he couldn't just leave an old friend like that. When we finally finished talking, we hadn't realized how late it was. He told me he practically lived across the state and that it would be at least a 5-hour drive. I invited him to stay the night instead, to which he obliged and said he simply needed to call his wife to tell her he'd be back the next day and would leave first thing in the morning. When he returned, I offered him my bed, to which he refused. I insisted that he should take the bed and I would sleep on the old futon that I'm pretty sure came with the place. After I insisted I'd be a terrible guest if I didn't allow him to sleep in a comfortable bed, he finally relented. When I woke up the next morning to my friend gone, I didn't question it. When he didn't answer my text, saying I enjoyed having him over, I figured he was a busy man and probably didn't have time to respond. When the police came to my door, I was more concerned. "Ryan Miller?" the officer asked, with a mixture of concern and accusation in his voice. "Yes," I responded nervously. "That's me." The man gave the inside of my apartment a look. "May I come in?" he asked. "You're not in trouble. We just need to speak with you." After I let the officer in, he explained everything. My friend had gone missing after he spent the night at my house. They said they knew I had nothing to do with his disappearance since they found his car hours away from my location, but still wanted to know if I knew anything about it since I was the last person to see him. I asked the officer what happened, to which he responded, "We found his car parked on the side of the road about 3 hours away from here, but he wasn't inside of it. After his wife reported him missing, we figured maybe you knew anything about why he disappeared since you were the last person to see him." He continued, "Did he complain about anything? Did he bring up being unhappy about work or something like that?" I thought about it for a hard minute. During the hours we spent talking, he never seemed upset with his life. He had annoyances here and there, sure, but it's not like he suspected his wife was cheating on him or he thought his job was dead end. He had the same thoughts most people had about life. It was annoying, but at the end of the day, we're glad we're here. No, nothing, I finally said. He didn't have any complaints that would have warranted him just disappearing. After a while, the officer left and I remained, worried and confused. It took me 3 whole hours of worrying about what happened to my friend before I realized the cameras were still recording. I brought the footage back up from the night prior and watched the entire thing until I saw the creature pop out from the shadows. Except it ignored me and headed straight for the bedroom. It moved too quickly for a creature of such proportions and fragility. When it made it to the bedroom, it simply stared, except it looked almost hungry. There was a strange saliva that seemed to come out of what I can only assume is its mouth, and it simply stared there for hours until my friend, as promised, left first thing in the morning. I watched the creature lunge into the shadows right before my friend's alarm went off, and watched as my friend snuck by me out of the door to try not to wake me up. I watched in horror as the creature left outside of the window, which was on the same side of the building as my friend's car was parked. I don't know if the creature killed my friend or ate him or what, but the moment I saw that, I realized it was not safe to live there anymore. I realize now I should have known that the moment I saw a demon in my living room picking up trash, but I figured I made the choice right in time. I didn't just leave the apartment complex, I moved states. I live on the opposite side of the country. I didn't even fully pack all of my stuff before I left. I took what I picked fit into one briefcase that was either somewhat valuable or would be annoying to replace and left as fast as I could. I never gave the police that information because I knew it would be insane and nobody would believe me, so I simply got as far away from that thing as possible. Now it's years later. I found a good job where I'm at right now. I live in an even nicer apartment too. The girl I was talking to didn't seem to understand what I was doing, which was also extremely difficult to explain, so we naturally stopped seeing each other. Other than that, my life is great. I kept some of the good habits too. I clean up after my messes. I stop drinking. I make sure no garbage ends up on my floors. I eat better. I even started going for daily walks to help me be healthier. All was going great, except for one day where I had slept in and was going to be late for work. I rushed out the door as fast as I could, cutting as many corners in my daily routine as possible, which of course meant I couldn't have made my bed. But when I came home that day, exhausted after a long day of work, I saw something that made my heart drop to my stomach. My bed was made. Up next, I overheard my mom cheating on my dad. But the other man's voice wasn't human. He met my mom at his Christian school after she was expelled from her previous school for weekly fights. According to him, she didn't show an ounce of disrespect or rebellion during her time there. No fights, no hooky. She wouldn't even curse on school grounds. They met in science class, where she sat in the front row directly beside him, and proximity created affection. Thank God for science, right? She kept up the innocent routine until graduation, and they married less than a month after the ceremony. Then they had me. That's where the strain really started. Having a kid in your teens is not exactly relaxing. Dad had to take up a second job to support us, while Mom stayed home all day. All I remember from those days is her getting lost inside her books. They looked ancient, leather-bound, with wrinkled yellow pages that always seemed to be covered in dust. Being a 5-year-old, I had no idea what she was doing. It wasn't until I hit 12 that my curiosity bubbled over. She kept the books hidden, locked in her closet behind her clothes. One day in late November, I was searching the closet for my Christmas gifts. I found nothing but the scent of mothballs, but something told me to dig deeper, and then it got weird. That's when I found them, books on black magic, demonology, and witchcraft. The air felt thick and heavy, like I was being watched. I heard the bedroom door opening, and I clumsily hid behind the clothes. Mom stepped into the closet, her hand grazing my shoulder as she reached for a book. She shut the door, leaving me in the dark. Mom started to read aloud in a language that was completely incomprehensible to me, but she was chanting it like she'd done it 1,000 times. Suddenly, the room shook, and the house got louder and louder with the sound of thunder. Then, the noise stopped, and the light died out. In the silence, the unmistakable voice of a man spoke. "This is the 3rd time today," the man said, his voice vibrating in my chest. "Sooner or later, your husband's going to catch on." My mom replied, "That idiot, he's too busy working to notice that his son looks nothing like him. Now are we going to do this or not?" I heard the sound of clothes hitting the floor before the bed began to rattle violently. The smell of sulfur filled the room. "Wow," my mom gasped. "No wonder they call you the prince." The man responded, "Once that son of ours is 18, he'll be the prince, and you and I will rule for eternity. I remained hidden in that closet for what felt like an eternity before Mom finally left the room. I made my way to the bathroom and pretended to be sick so as not to draw suspicion. I never told Dad what I heard. I just kept living like everything was normal. However, I'm writing this now because my 18th birthday is in 1 week, and I have no idea what's in store for the party.